Luther Burton's personal foul penalties on Saturday were inexcusable, and they're part of what I'm worried about Missouri going forward. So let's talk about that and what I'm not worried about as well. Right now, I'm Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I want to assess Brady Cook's play a little bit more closely against Boston College and also talk generally about my worries and non-worries, the things that don't concern me at all so far about this team. I think there's an important distinction to be made there, quite honestly. But before I start the show, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off of your order. And you know what? I actually want to start the program here with an email from longtime listener Jim, who has a major concern about this Missouri Tigers football team. He says, quote, "While Luther Burton is an unquestionable talent and surely a future NFL star, he is by far my least favorite Tiger. His childish antics in the BC game could have cost us dearly. This is not new from him. The consequences of his actions, a brief chewing out by Coach Drinkwitz. You and I both know that this will have zero impact on him. He will be up to his same immature acts throughout this season. Sadly, his actions are being mimicked by others. Watch sophomore Marquise Johnson closely, and it looks like the Luther Burton approach to me first football. I realize I'm a very old school guy, but under Coach Dan Devine and Coach Gary Pinkel, Luther Burton would not have returned to the game after his multiple personal fouls. Under Coach Drink, he was right back in there. How refreshing would it be to see, how refreshing it would be, and what a great signal it would send to his teammates to hold him out of the Vanderbilt game. That would be a consequence for his action. You made no mention of this on your podcast. Am I on an island here? Have any of your podcast listeners mentioned this at all? Thanks again for your great work." Well, first of all, one reason I didn't mention the Luther Burton penalties in great detail on Sunday is because I hadn't gotten a great look at them yet. You know, on those early Sunday morning pods, you know, I kind of got to balance it. Do I want to go back and watch the full game broadcast and go through all of my all 22 footage, or do I want to get the pod out more quickly before the NFL games get started? So I tend to go a little bit more, I tend to try to find the balance there is what I'm trying to say. So I didn't get to really a great look at those Luther Burton penalties until this morning. And I'll just say there is absolutely no excuse for either one of those Luther Burton penalties that were part of making it a comical 2nd and 59 or whatever the heck it ended up being at Faurot Field there. Obviously, those were drive-killing penalties by Missouri and by Luther Burton specifically in a game in which the Tigers only ended up winning by 6 points. So to listener Jim's point, yes, there was absolutely no excuse by that. And when Coach Drinkwitz came up to Luther Burton after the second penalty and got in his face, well, that was very much deserved. To Jim's point, that was the least he deserved for that, I would say. But I will say this. Here's one thing I will agree with that part of what listener Jim says. The fact that the part that I will say is I think that this is more out of character for Luther Burton. Jim seems to think that this is an in-character typical type of moment from Burton. I'll be honest, just think back to the previous season, 2023. I'm having a difficult time picturing Luther Burton committing one of these personal foul type of penalties. Maybe it happened. Maybe it happened in a big spot, and I'm just not recalling it. I'm genuinely asking. I know my memory is not 100% perfect. That's for darn sure. But as to this idea that that Burton needs to be suspended for a game, or that Gary Pinkel would have suspended someone for a game for committing multiple personal fouls. I don't know that that's necessarily the case either, but I do agree that there needs to be some type of accountability here from Burton, without a doubt. And without being in that locker room, without being Eli Drinkwitz or actually knowing Luther Burton or anybody else in that locker room, it's hard for me to say what the consequence should actually be there. I know this. I don't think Eli Drinkwitz spends a ton of time chewing Luther Burton out in front of the team, certainly not in front of the fans and the public and all that good stuff. So maybe this is enough. Maybe Luther Burton apologized to his teammates in the locker room. Again, there's a whole lot of information that we don't know there. But here's what we do know. We do know that the Boston College guy took Luther Burton's mouthpiece off of his face mask. By the way, do these guys ever actually put the mouthpiece in their mouth anymore, or is it just an accessory at this point, a style thing? But regardless, you can't rip the guy's mouthpiece off. Well, then Luther Burton, not only did he rip the other guy's mouthpiece off in exchange, well, he threw it off of the field too. So Luther didn't just get back at the guy, he escalated it. There's no excuse for that. And frankly, if he just takes the guy's mouthpiece, well, and if he doesn't throw it across the field, I think he probably gets away with it. So not sure what in the heck he's doing there. And then on the same drive, he just inexplicably tosses the ball with his left hand into a Boston College player's face on the sidelines. Why? For what purpose? Again, you can say, well, there were some things maybe early in the game that got him upset. Guess what? That's football. You have to control your emotions. That's part of it. Listen, I'm not trying to get up all on my high horse here. Anybody who's ever played golf with me regularly knows that, well, I've gotten a lot better with my temper in recent years. I'm not perfect. So I'm not trying to throw stones here. I'm really not. But I'm not trying to let anybody off of the hook for what is obviously inexcusable behavior by Burton here, behavior that cost his team, that killed this drive. Fortunately, it didn't cost Missouri a game, but to listener Jim's point, if this kind of thing happens in the future, another close ball game, that could be a huge, huge variable here. So I don't want to overreact in terms of, hey, here's what I think Missouri should do. Here's how Luther Burton should be punished, because I don't know all the ins and outs of what's been happening behind the scenes here, but I will agree that there is no excuse for either one of those penalties, and there has to be some type of accountability there, or else you are kind of telling your team that you're accepting it, and it cannot be acceptable. So again, those were a couple of bad moments from Luther Burton on Saturday. But to me, as a guy who's watched his career, I'd say as close as anybody, his college career specifically, I just think that's an out-of-character moment for him. It just doesn't strike me as something that Luther Burton does on a regular basis. And as to the idea that, well, obviously, listener Jim, not a big fan of Luther Burton. I just want to make it clear, I am a huge fan of Luther Burton. He is not. I don't have a least favorite Tiger, period, on this roster. I like all of these guys so far, to be honest with you. There's nobody who bothers me whatsoever on this team. So that's just my perspective. Want to make it clear there. But again, while I'm not worried about Luther Burton losing his cool so much in the future, there are some legitimate worries that I have about this Missouri football program. Well, not even so much the program, but this 2024 team specifically moving forward. Some stuff the Tigers absolutely have to clean up if they're going to reach their goals this season, but also some things that are giving me a heck of a lot of confidence for the Tigers moving forward. So let's talk about all that here in just a minute. First, though, let's talk about a 5-hour energy, 300 minutes to be exact. You see that quick math I did just now. Well, 5-hour energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, you got to take a 5-hour energy shot so you can check everything off your list. So if you're like me and you've got to do a podcast, you got to mow the lawn, you got to take care of the kids, do the laundry, all this good stuff, well, you're going to need that 5-hour energy to power through everything you need to get accomplished. 5-hour energy is the brand hardworking people like us have trusted for more than 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling that we need to get through a busy, hectic day. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-hour energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Now, while I was in the stands at Faurot Field, I didn't get a great look at the Luther Burton personal fouls, but the one that really made me lose my mind was the Joseph Charleston one on a kickoff that wasn't even really a play, another touchback for the 1,000,000th time. Well, again, how do you get a personal foul when nobody's even being blocked or tackled? What are we doing? Just run back to the sidelines as I screamed into the void at Memorial Stadium. But speaking of these type of penalties, it's not really so much Luther Burton. It's just the entire team is what I'm worried about, really, especially the offense. To be fair, even though I brought up Joseph Charleston here, it just seems like time and time again, the offense has been shooting itself in the foot, whether it's, procedure penalties, lining up incorrectly, holds, that type of deal. As opposed to, say, penalties of aggression that have been happening on defense occasionally, like a pass interference, a hands to the face penalty by Chris McClellan, although the Missouri defense didn't have any penalties, I believe, until the third game against the Boston College Eagles. But, again, while the 3rd and 15 hands to the face by McClellan on the opening drive, obviously that's a really consequential penalty. It's just not one of those that's a huge brain fart, in my opinion. Okay, his hands got up a little bit too high. That's something we can remind ourselves of and hopefully not commit too many of those violations in the future. But when it comes to the sort of pattern in the Eli Drinkwitz era of too many procedure errors, just too many unforced penalties, especially on offense, that is something I'm getting a little bit worried about. And speaking of something that was a feature of last season, well, I praised Connor Tollison's run blocking in the previous episode. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the early and or bad snaps have completely gone out the window either. Again, another unforced error by Missouri as Tollison snaps the ball too early to Brady Cook. Of course, I was semi-sarcastically yelling in the stands, hey, was there some disconcerting signals there? Did the defense maybe clap? That type of deal. But anyway, I just thought that, gosh, that there's a play that cost Missouri big time against LSU last year. Those early snaps, those missed snaps can be absolute drive killers, and it caused Missouri to settle for a field goal without a doubt in this ball game. That could have obviously been a huge deal in what ended up being a one possession victory for Missouri. So those little things, the good news is, while it has been a pattern under Drinkwitz, last year's Missouri team was the least penalized of the Drinkwitz era, and my perception was Missouri got better as the season went along with that type of thing. All we can hope is at this point that is the case in 2024. Now, when it comes to things that I'm not concerned about, or maybe better put, things that I'm very confident about with Missouri right now, number one, the talent. I just think that there's a lot of great players on this team. There's a lot of possible NFL talent on this team on both sides of the football. And most impressively to me, most of the offense, of course, was back from last season. But defensively, a lot of new faces came in the transfer portal. And so far, so good. I mentioned Chris McClellan. He's been a really positive contributor so far. Zion Young has been really good as well. Corey Flagg and Khalil Jacobs as well. By the way, I know in my previous show I mixed up Khalil Jacobs and Corey Flagg's numbers. Corey Flagg is number 11, Khalil Jacobs 29. I got it. I mixed it up in the moment there. Apologies out there, all of you, for that. Just wanted to make that quick correction. But you know what? Since I'm speaking of Zion Young, there was a play in this football game that got unnoticed probably by most people. It isn't going to be in your traditional box score, but this was as big of a play defensively as was made outside of those 2 turnovers, I would say. So it's 14-14 here. Missouri has just tied the game with a 2-point conversion. The momentum feels like it's all on its side, but Boston College has driven slightly into Missouri territory here. Tigers have a 3rd and 10 with a good chance to get off of the field. Let's zoom in here on number 4 for Boston College, the guy to your left in the slot here. As we roll it forward, you'll notice number 4 goes through this Missouri zone defense and has a pretty good shot at a big play here. And even zoom in here on the quarterback, Thomas Castellanos. He sees him. He's looking the whole way and is actually holding on to the football a little bit longer just so he can clear number 28 there for Missouri, get over the top of the defense for a potential big play here. And there's no doubt that Castellanos, the BC quarterback, has the arm to get it there. But what happens right as he wants to throw this football? Number 9 for Missouri, Zion Young, beats the left tackle and impacts his back, his arm, the whole deal, just smashes into Castellanos, causing that ball to flutter pathetically for an incomplete pass. Another thing to notice here, number 29 for Missouri, Corey Flagg, as he did for much of this football game. You'll notice he's clearly just spying Castellanos here. No rush, no attempt at getting into coverage here. This was basically Khalil Jacobs. Did I say Corey Flagg again? I meant Khalil Jacobs. Khalil Jacobs, this was his assignment here for basically most of the game. And it makes a lot of sense. The only thing is, of course, like every defensive strategy, this is a trade-off. This probably caused an opening in a zone in theory here that maybe somebody like Khalil Jacobs would have been in different circumstances if you don't have to spy somebody like Thomas Castellanos. So a great job here by Zion Young, making, to me, as big of a play as there was in the ball game. So this could have easily been a touchdown for the Eagles with a clean pocket that, frankly, Castellanos got a lot of clean pockets in this game because of that, partially because of Missouri's strategy, its rushing strategy, and the spy strategy. But right here, Young just makes a great one-on-one play to beat his man and get the Tigers off the field. So looking at all these games closely, again, while the concerns are some sloppy moments here by Missouri, I love the Tigers' talent right now. And also, for the second year in a row, it sure looks like Eli Drinkwitz knocked it out of the park by hiring a coordinator. This time, of course, it's Corey Batoon on the defensive side after hiring Kirby Moore as his first offensive coordinator this past season. And as Drinkwitz says, he says, quote, "You got to remember, I got new staff members. I got a lot of new staff, a lot of new players. And so for us to have to face adversity and figure out who we are, who we can count on, what are you going to do with your backs against the wall and you're tired?" I think that was really important. And again, Corey Batoon, what can we complain about from him so far? I think for the most part, that Missouri defense structurally has looked pretty similar to the last couple seasons, but this was clearly a very specific game plan for Thomas Castellanos. And other than a couple coverage busts on the back end, well, I thought Missouri, especially on the front seven, executed the plan incredibly well. And the interesting thing about that is I've heard Chris Long, former St. Louis Rams great, a guy with a podcaster in his own right. Well, something he said, he was a defensive end back in the day. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically 90% of the adjustments defensively are made on the back end in the secondary. Well, in this Boston College game, it truly was the front end that had most of the adjustments from what I could see, because on the back end, Missouri in the secondary was still playing mostly man-to-man defense with the occasional cover 3 look or other type of zone look thrown in there, and they also played a lot of dime defense on obvious passing situations. So nothing wildly different, but the subtle adjustments on the up front for Missouri, I think they were smart. Definitely gave up something to get something, but I think that was a trade that Missouri would make over and over again. And in the second quarter, when Brady Cook threw a ball to Luther Burton that was nearly intercepted but resulted in the biggest passing play of the day for the Tigers, I have to say, in the back of my brain, I was thinking, man, Cook looks a little shook right now. But when I looked back on it, Brady was quite a bit better than I was originally and emotionally thinking there early in the ball game. But of course, as always, stuff to improve upon. So let's talk about and assess Brady Cook versus Boston College here in just a little bit. But first, you've heard me talk a ton about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, I have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3 free week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. And the beautiful thing is you can cancel at absolutely any time you would like. And here's the deal. Missouri, of course, going to be a ranked team again this week. They moved down a spot. Darn those Tennessee Volunteers. But the Tigers currently a 21.5-point favorite over the Vanderbilt Commodores. What do you think about that? Well, you got to visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. So on that ill-advised pass by Brady Cook that went through the Boston College defender's hands and into Luther Burton's hands, I don't even think I need to break that play down. I think we all realize, even watching on television in the stands, that was probably a regrettable decision and a very lucky moment for Missouri. But other than that, I really thought Brady Cook's decision-making was on point. I really couldn't complain with a single decision that Brady Cook made in this ball game. And as for his accuracy, I actually thought his accuracy was more concerning on some of those shorter passes than it was on the long passes, even though a couple of them, again, were just really, really close to being completions. For example, on this shot to Theo Wease down the sidelines, I suppose if you're going to get really critical, you could say, well, he's kind of got Luther Burton immediately here. Luther lines up in the backfield, gets onto what appears to be a Boston College safety or linebacker, probably a pretty good matchup and some easy yards there for Missouri, something the Tigers will usually take. But on the other hand, you can't just throw the dink routes all day and expect the corners to respect it, to respect the deep ball and to back up as much as you would like them to. Well, pre-snap here, obviously the Eagles are showing press coverage. Hey, Theo Wease is as good of a go-up-and-get-it guy as Missouri has on the team. And look at this throw. What exactly is wrong with this throw? There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Right on the money, right on the sidelines where Theo can catch it. Now 24 gets his arm on Theo's right arm. He isn't able to get that second hand up. But just in terms of, let's analyze this from Brady Cook's perspective. In terms of a decision, you've got a one-on-one matchup with your best, I would say, down the boundary, sideline, go up and get it receiver. Theo's better at that than Burton, in my opinion. This is the matchup that you want. This is a shot that you have to occasionally take regardless. It's a good throw, too. There's nothing to complain about here from Brady Cook's perspective. And this play is a similar look out of a slightly different bunch-style formation here to the right, as this time Theo Wease is the one who runs the quick out, and it's Luther Burton who runs a slot fade. He takes the deep shot. And again, decision-wise, yes, this is 3rd down and 4. Not a do-or-die play, though, as the Tigers go for it on 4th and 4 after this incompletion and make it anyway. But the Tigers do settle for a field goal. If Missouri hits a touchdown here, it's a 3-possession game, and it's all over for the Eagles at this point, I would say. But the pass, again, a good decision. How can you possibly complain about this decision by Cook? A one-on-one matchup, possibly the best receiver in the country. He's got his man beat, by the way. It's just a titch too long. And in terms of what I've given some constructive criticism on Brady Cook's base, him maybe throwing off his back foot a little too much, well, that isn't the case here. He's got good mechanics here, steps into the throw, the weight is on the front foot, no pressure. It just a titch too long. That's one of those balls to me. I like the decision. I even like the throw. It's just a titch too off. I can't even complain about the mechanics there. That's just one of those things where hopefully the law of averages balances out eventually and the Tigers start hitting some more of those deep shots. And finally, just one quick fan experience note that I would like to mention before I get out of here. I'm not saying that we need to fire everyone who's in charge of sound at Faurot Field. No, that would be too harsh. But let's just say that we need to reimagine sound mixing at Faurot Field, because I thought we were supposed to have a better, more improved sound experience, and it felt like we did the first week or two, but my goodness, in week 3, it was just a comedy of errors in the sound department. Way too loud, often to the point of total distortion and just high-pitched feedback. Is somebody over there have their hand on a potentiometer? Well, if so, please feel free to turn that sucker a little bit to the left or down a little bit, depending on the direction of said potentiometer. But regardless, it sounds like a little thing, but that's actually kind of a big thing, in my humble opinion. If you're going to be torturing your fans with horrible sound design, that's not exactly a reason to make me want to go back to the games. Listen, I'm going to go regardless. I'll get some earplugs if necessary, but come on now. That was a little bit embarrassing for Missouri, I thought. Just having horrific sound mixing there. That was not a good part of the experience. But you know what was a good part of experience? Getting a dub over a ranked team. I will take that any day of the week. And thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou to relive it. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Football. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.